The topic of the first paper today is lifestyle migrants in Japan's Seto inland seas islands, beyond Western-based conceptualizations of lifestyle migration. So over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for having us. We are looking forward to this session. So again, we are both from Hiroshima University. We recently finished our PhD and now we are working as assistant professors. And we did this field work on lifestyle migrants on Seto Inland Sea Islands together, although we have slightly different focuses when it comes to research. In my case, I'm interested in degrowth, sustainable lifestyle, and also small-scale entrepreneurship, but from a diverse economy perspective. While
I'm more focused on the creative part of those entrepreneurs and also their diversified entrepreneur networks. And another research of mine is about small-scale community-based creative events, but today I will basically focus on the network part.
Okay, so we'll share our screen. So in this presentation, we will focus on basically exploring the values and practices of urban to rural lifestyle migrants in Japanese depopulating islands communities. And we will try to contextualize rural Japan within like broader debates on well-being and resilience in small communities in connection with other strands of research on lifestyle entrepreneurship, creativity-led rural revitalization strategies, and within the, again, even broader context of post-growth economies and societies. So our area of focus is the Seto Inland Sea in Western Japan. And if you look at the dominant narrative about rural areas in general in Japan, including small island communities, is that these are all peripheral areas in decline, characterized by a stagnating economy, which is still mainly dominated by primary and secondary industries, places that are lagging behind in terms of infrastructure development, public services, and characterized by widespread economic and demographic decline and abandonment. And in particular, we are focusing on small islands because they are especially fragile in terms of their ecological, economic, and social structure. And they also tend to be even more resource-constrained environment, which leads in the dominating discourse to more challenges when it comes to their potential for development, especially when it's meant in terms of economic development. And Japan is basically at the forefront, although these are trends that are quite common to most, like I would say, global North societies. But Japan is basically at the forefront when it comes to being a so-called hyper-aging society. For example, in more than 22% of Japan's small communities, more than half of the residents are older than 65 years old. And this situation is especially severe in many of the small islands that are, of which there are many across Japan. For example, some of the Setouchi Islands have aging rates of more than 60 to 80%. And they still mainly depend on primary and secondary industries, although like islands often have the image of being tourism destination. This is not really the case with Japanese island and many of the islands of the Seto Inland Sea.
Maybe I can talk about here. So this is just one case study from an island in Hiroshima Prefecture called Osakishimojima Island. On this island, there is one biggest community called Yutakamachi. We can see more than 2/3 of the population are already retired age, more than 65 years old. But overall, the population, we can see 1/3 of the population are more than 80 years old. So by comparing this population with Tokyo, we can see there are almost no people between 15 to 35, this kind of age gap was missing. So therefore, this is a very big issue for those communities.
But although these issues exist and are very serious in small Japanese island, at the same time, we are seeing a movement towards, well, in relation to Japanese rural areas in general, which is trying to see decline as a possibility. And this is part of a broader, I would say, movement of ideas such as post-growth society, degrowth, well-being economies, diverse economies, which are all different ways of conceptualizing the economy and of exploring economic practices, institutions, and different forms of organization that are founded on principles that are different from just pure economic growth and capital accumulation. For example, in the Japanese context, some scholars have talked of the so-called depopulation dividend, or concepts such as creative depopulation, which are basically all about trying to prioritize quality of life and social and environmental well-being over quantitative economic growth and even quantitative population growth, as in the Japanese context, this is seen as basically impossible at this point. And so we can connect this with concepts such as creative rurality, lifestyle migration, and quality of life, which are all about reimagining rural and island communities as multifunctional spaces where creativity-based strategies can be used for revitalization. And in this context, so-called lifestyle migration, often connected to small business creation, can be a potential catalyst for social, economic, and environmental regeneration. So lifestyle migration is a concept that has been explored in like international, especially Western-based literature, in terms of like people seeking alternative lifestyle for people who are disillusioned with urban living, people seeking slower lifestyle, more work-life balance, or more space, natural amenities, and so on. But at the same time, especially in the so-called Western context, lifestyle migration has also been associated to negative outcomes, especially in terms of gentrification, which leads again to raising property prices in small communities, and social conflict that is often caused by the fact that immigrants represent sort of enclaves within the receiving communities that don't really blend very well with the community. They're often even foreigners who move in, and which brings also to some kind of economic disparity between the immigrant and the local communities. So lifestyle migration has been seen often in a negative way as well. In the case of Japan, the context is a bit different. First of all, the lifestyle migrants are mainly domestic migrants, so mainly Japanese people who move from urban to rural areas. And again, they are seeking lifestyle change and more meaningful ways of living. But their main draw is wanting to engage in so-called rural-based lifestyle, which means basically lifestyles that trying to look for a stronger connection with the land, and in case of the islands, with the sea as well. For example, among immigrants, we have a lot of people who are doing organic farming or like other land-based occupation. And many of them are also establishing small businesses to try to reconcile their livelihood goals with their personal needs and values. That's why what we call lifestyle entrepreneurship. And there's also a variety of terminology that it's used specifically in Japan to talk about these urban to rural migrants. For example, we have I-turn, which means people who move into communities where they have no connection with. But we have also U-turn, who are people who are original from a rural or island community, then they go to the city and then they come back and so on. So we will not go into this classification, but this shows that this is an issue that is very talked about in Japan. And also unlike in many Western contexts where this rural in-migration is often viewed negatively, in Japan, this ability to attract new residents is seen as essential for the survival of more rural communities. And also Japan is characterized by the fact that it does not have a pre-existing significant counter-urbanization trend, like, for example, in places like the UK, where we have this sort of move of urban people to more rural areas, which is seen often as negative because of gentrification-related issues. So it's hard to draw parallels between the dynamics of lifestyle migration in Japan compared to other contexts. And also the Japanese government is actually actively encouraging this process through a government program called Chiki Okoshi Kyoryukutai, which means Regional Revitalization Cooperation Group, which is actually sponsoring people and subsidizing them for moving into small rural communities, including island again. So in this presentation, we want to try to illustrate the challenges, motivation, and approaches which are behind the choice of this lifestyle creative in migrants to relocate to small island communities, and how these processes contribute to the construction of both lifestyle migrants' quality of life in their new destination, but also the interplay between these immigrants and their local communities, as well as the diversity of newcomer networks. And this is important because this is interesting because Japan is not only kind of different context from what has been researched so far in research around lifestyle migration, but it's also, as we mentioned before, the country where this like rural and island depopulation processes is happening the fastest. So it's sort of a precursor of what is probably going to happen in other countries as well.
Okay, from this part, I've introduced a little bit of our case study and method. So this is a mainly qualitative-based research. We select 17 islands within the both eastern side and western side of the Seto Inland Sea. We locate a lot of immigrants. A lot of them also open their own business. We track them from social media, published books and magazines. So that's how we find out some islands receive a comparatively higher number of those respondents. So we conducted over 45 semi-structured interviews, and this field work from 2019 until now. So like I mentioned, the case from Osakishimojima before, 2/3 of their population are Asian people. As we can see, the population from 2010 to 2015, all the communities keep shrinking. And some community receive comparatively higher number of immigrants, but some community not. Okay, next one. So very important finding, just look at their profile of those 45 respondents. We can figure out more than half of them are quite multifunctional, which means they are not only engaged in tourism business, but also focus on other perspectives like a creative perspective, and also they're engaging with a primary industry like farming and hunting. So those percentage represent how diversified those people are really try to not put all the egg in one basket. So this represent the very important profile of those island newcomers. Maybe you can.
So, and we can see different, so although we tend to conflate all lifestyle migrants in the same category, there we saw actually several different in-migration patterns. We identified four main ones. The first is about, most of them actually involve relatively younger people, mainly in their 30s and 40s, which again, it's a bit different from much of the work on lifestyle migration in Western context, where there is a lot of work around people moving to rural areas after retirement. In this case, we have mainly younger people. So, and the first pattern is what we call independent newcomers. So basically what we call I-turn in the classification before, which means people who move, seek out by themselves a new island destination to live, and they move and they move in there without having any previous family connection or so on. And often they move in with their whole family. And the second pattern is connected to that government program I mentioned before, the Chiki Okoshi Kyoryukutai program, So people who move into the island communities because of this program. And this program is often a 3-year program, but people often tend to stay and settle down in the community after this 3-year period. And the third pattern is connected to what we call before U-turn. So people, again, mainly younger people who move out of their small island often for school, for work, but then they return back to their original communities. And the first pattern, which was really minor among our respondents, was again retirees, people moving to the islands after retirement. But this again was just only a couple of people. And what characterized most of these lifestyle migrants is the redefinition of the meaning of what a good life entails, and basically what is necessary to live well. So we have common ideas around voluntary simplicity, wanting to downsize their material consumption, using again a variety of creativity-based ways of living, which include like reusing, repairing, upcycling, and basically reusing creatively the local resources. We're also looking for more localized lifestyles and for more like self-sufficiency-based lifestyle. So as I mentioned before, many of them are like doing organic farming or at least growing food for their own consumption. So if we look at elements of lifestyle, of this kind of lifestyle migration and lifestyle entrepreneurship connecting to lifestyle migration, we see that this redefinition of what the meaning of a good life is and what is necessary to live well brings about a lot of other ways of like structuring and redefining their businesses. So as Mo mentioned before, they're very multifunctional and diversified businesses, which helps with resilience in small communities. There are also their attitude towards using resources is shaped by self-imposed limits and ethical commitment, also to the community. So the community dimension becomes very important. And they are strongly oriented towards building reconnection, both with the community, but also with outside of the community itself. So network creation becomes very important. And so many of them have carry with themselves a strong sense of responsibility towards the local community, which comes across almost as a revitalization mission. So they feel like they can play many roles in the community and that their individual contribution is much more valuable and valued by the people. But although there is this strong commitment towards the community, we also see like issues such as like they feel frustrated with the mindset of the community local people, which are lacking in the willingness and power to change, and who also tend to have a more fixed mindset in comparison to newcomers who are more innovative. And we also find cases of, heard about cases of migrants who failed to stay because they were unable to adapt to the local community. And often even local people's expectation towards immigrant might not correspond to what they actually receive or what migrants actually do, and which can cause some conflict.
Maybe I can take over from here. So from this research, we also found out one extra pattern we call trans-immigrants, which means they keep moving between the city and island. However, they perceive themselves a weaker connection with the community and social belonging, but they actually play a very important relational role to connect islands and the outside. So they are highly relational population, but they also are different compared with the commuters. So in terms of network, we identified a very diverse network among different island, between island, between island, inside island and communities. We also locate some clusters between some area. So I will introduce them one by one. So the first level of a network is what they connect the cities they come from, like Tokyo and Osaka. They try to establish their business on the island. So this kind of network very often is very private business network. They don't share it at the island level. So the second level of network, they start to collaborate and establish another level of local level network. So in this level, every island business collaborate with each other and try to share partly of their resources to the community. And the third level of a network is at non-business side. So it's more focused on how to promote this kind of island life and attract more potential immigrants. And the fourth partner of the network is also the non-business side, but more focused on the community quality of life and also collaborate with community elderly peoples. So, okay. So maybe you can summarize.
So in summary, this study has contributed to our increased understanding of how lifestyle migrants in Japan are imagining, performing, reproducing, and sometimes renegotiating new lives and businesses in peripheral small islands. But this also raises some questions about the future. For example, one characteristic of migrants is that they feel like they can adapt to so-called inconvenient ways of life. Like in their own words, they say life on the island is not as convenient as life on the city, but they like that. But the question is, can this lifestyle be sustained in the long term? And also the migrants' desired lifestyle before the migration process are hard to achieve in reality, and they require significant amount of compromise, renegotiation, both with the community, with themselves, with their families. And as we said, there are both positive and negative examples of social relationship between the communities and newcomers. And this again raises another questions of what will happen in the future as the local community ages and dies out, and maybe new migrants move in. How this social dynamics will change within the community. But the biggest probably issue is the fact that we have this general feeling of uncertainty when it comes to the future of small islands. So this aging and the population trend is continuing, and although immigrants are moving in, it's still not enough to balance out the loss of population. And as a result of the population, also basic services such as hospitals and schools are disappearing. So again, we see questions about the long-term sustainability of immigrants' lifestyles, but also the limits of individual efforts of immigrants for community resilience and revitalization. So the question is again how the kind of local governments can support this process in a more maybe decisive way. And for areas of future research, again, interesting aspect to explore would be this the concept of quality of life, but both at the individual and the community level, and how these different levels interplay, and the aspect of mobility, especially this concept of relational transmigrants, the diversity of newcomers networks to support small community resilience, and again, after COVID-19, the concept that maybe small communities are the new big, so people might be wanting to live in this kind of small communities more than before. So that's all for our presentation. You can find here our references and email if you want to contact us. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simona and Mo. Very interesting presentation. Lots of mixed methods and lots of factual information and very theoretically informed. Did anyone have a question? Put your hand up. We've got a question from Ian. You go for it, Ian.
Yeah, thank you. That was really fantastic. I have a question about the home ownership in the villages on the island, and what happens when the older people pass away, and what are the decisions? Are you researching the decisions made by their children about how to manage the property?
You can go first.
Okay, so do you have any idea of the Japanese context about related issues.
ちょっと分かってるけど。
Okay, so okay, so also for the benefit of everybody who might not have knowledge about this. So in Japan, like managing houses, especially when people pass away and the house becomes empty, is quite complicated. So many traditional houses, especially from the older generation, first of all, have the butsudan, which is the family altar in their house, which makes people a bit kind of reluctant to rent the house to other people or even sell it when this family altar is still inside the house. And it's apparently quite costly and complicated to move it out. So this is one thing. Then another thing, like there is no incentive, like for example, in terms of like higher taxation when for people to rent or sell their house. So, and most people, therefore, like for example, if their parents pass away or their grandparents pass away and the house is empty, so most people feel like, okay, we are not going to do anything with the house. We just leave it there. So we have these so-called akiya, empty houses, which are like a huge issue in Japan. Like some communities in the islands we are researching right now, people were saying some communities that have up to 80% of the total houses which are abandoned and nobody is using them. And often the family comes back maybe once a year for the Obon holiday, which is the sort of remembering the family members who passed away. So they go open the house, clean the house, maybe clean the family altar and the family graves and so on. And they use it maybe again once or twice a year. So, and this is a quite complicated issue also for migrants who want to move in the communities and maybe find a house to buy or to rent, because it's people don't really put the house on the market. So if you want to find a house, you have to go to the people in the community, start talking to them and engage with them, ask, okay, is there any house that might be available for renting? And can we talk to the family who owns this house? And maybe you have to negotiate and get this family to know you first, feel that you are reliable enough, and then maybe they will rent the house to you. While, yeah, so there have been a lot of efforts in kind of trying to get people to somehow let go of these houses, especially if they're not using them at all and they're just sitting in the community, kind of degrading slowly, not slowly. Actually, in Japan, houses are built not to last very long time. So if you don't live inside the house and don't take care of it, it will just kind of start disintegrating very quickly. And then it's just half destroyed house sitting in the community, because people also don't have any incentive to remove the house itself. So it also kind of adds to this feeling of abandonment and degradation within the community, and it's a problem that is not being solved yet. So
can I add something? So for the city, not rural places where we live in, Hiroshima city reported 4,000 empty vacant semi-abandoned kind of old Japanese house. But if you check, there is a website called Akiya Bank in my city, only 21 cases reported. The rest, like 3,980 are missing. So this is called highly culture related. So this is the city case. On the island is getting worse. Besides the Butsudan, the Buddhism chapel issue, there is also a concern by your old neighbor, even the owner living in Osaka and Tokyo, but they still worried if they cannot bring a nice people in the community, this will ruin their reputation. So we have some cases, people, before they purchase old house, the owner clearly tells them, you are not allowed to run any business. If you can only leave it here as your second home, it's fine. But if you're running business, it could bring trouble to my neighborhood. That's also one reason, I think. So therefore, even this kind of abandoned house keep rotting in the communities, they are not willing to sell it. This is kind of biggest issue for the people who want to move to those islands. And therefore, for some islands, they establish some share house system. So for the people who has interest to this island, they can stay here for temporary stay, maybe around 6 months or 1 year. During this process, those people have to work by themselves, talk with the locals and be friendly and earning their trust. few of them can make it, find their dream house and stay and establish business. But there is also a lot of issue come after with how they engage with those communities. I think hopefully answer the questions.
Right, well, thank you very much. If we could just thank Simona and Mo one more time. Thank you very much. Fascinating discussion, and reminded me of, you know, many of the islands that I've been to in Japan, where I meet so many people who have come to set up a business or do a craft or an art, and kind of seeking out this idealized location. Yeah, really
but
interesting.
it would be interesting to see the impact of COVID, as in many countries, people have moved out of the urban centers. And I know that in Japan this happened. A lot of people left Tokyo during the lockdowns. And these were the creatives. And from your presentation, you showed that about 20% of these people who do ITERN are coming from a creative background, or they want to move into creative jobs, right? Is that right? So I wonder whether we're going to see the aftermath of, you know, the COVID and the impact that might be having. And that would be an interesting research for you to do. Yeah. Just
it's future study there.
Mention the too many coffee issue.